As U.S. relations with Russia have deteriorated in recent years, there's one impact with emotional consequences. In 2012, Russia halted adoptions of its orphans by U.S. parents. Lisa Fletcher introduces us to an Atlanta area family still waiting on faraway children they already love.
The Russians successfully meddled in our democracy, and our intelligence agencies have concluded they will do so again.
The notion of Russian interference in U.S. elections with a U.S. president sounded this week like questions from decades ago, when the Cold War was still very hot. Those Cold War tactics that thawed under Mikhail Gorbachev and President H.W. Bush may be back. By 2011, 2 years into the Obama administration, relations began to break down. Vladimir Putin accused America of interfering in its election. And bit by bit, the countries took swipes at each other.
They are a smaller country. They are a weaker country. Their economy doesn't produce anything that anybody wants to buy except oil and gas and arms.
When diplomacy doesn't work, threats of war and sanctions follow. In 2012, the international impasse went as far as to include children.
Dear Bogdan and Yura, Ryan is home from Europe. Yay, I missed him so much, sorry. I long for the day I can write the same thing in this journal about you.
Sisters Joy and Jamie Romano have been waiting 5 years to welcome 2 orphaned Russian brothers home to Atlanta and into the arms of their family. Mark and Pam Romano have a heart for kids. They are former foster parents, have 3 kids of their own, and were advocating for Russian children languishing in orphanages, particularly one little boy named Bogdan, when Pam had a revelation.
And I was, ironically, cleaning my kid's bathtub, and I just heard in my heart, you know, you're never going to find a family for him because you're meant to be his family.
Okay. And so began their journey.
Our friends rallied and helped us with fundraisers, and people we barely knew, you know, gave us money towards it.
For a year, Pam and Mark waded through mountains of legal paperwork to adopt Bogdan and his younger brother, Yura.
You name it, it was in here.
Finally, they received their invitation to visit the Russian orphanage, a last step before the boys would come home.
And the minute he saw Mark, he just was like, Papa, Papa, like he'd been waiting for him to walk through the door his entire life. It was like amazing.
The few hours that we were there, like, it just felt so real. Like, I was like, these are my brothers.
But that day would never come. Just months later, Putin retaliated for U.S. actions against Russia by putting an end to American families adopting Russian children, ending a 60,000-child legacy and canceling hundreds of adoptions just weeks or months away from completion.
So it really came as a complete shock to us.
I mean, it was
complete shock.
The family reached out to their U.S. representative, Doug Collins, who immediately contacted Secretary of State Kerry and has since been in touch with Secretary of State Tillerson, working to undo the ban.
What we're trying to do is to work through diplomatic channels to work with the Russian government.
You know, sanctions are often economic. Why do you think Vladimir Putin chose to entangle orphans in politics?
Because I think in many ways Vladimir Putin sees the West as an adversary. I think there's a contentious debate there, and he's willing to use most avenues that he can to push an agenda or to get things that he would want.
Children should not be used as pawns, and I really think they are being used that way. Like, those children, a lot of them will never see outside of those orphanage walls.
Pam made half a dozen trips to D.C. She lobbied lawmakers and appealed to the president. An appeal, she says, fell on deaf ears.
All our calls for help were completely ignored.
It was so silent.
We had a letter signed by 145 congressmen and women that went to President Obama early on, okay, in 2013, completely ignored.
This is something that can be solved. This is something about, at the end of the day, that affects families all over the world, and that's the care and love of children who are desperately needing that, and my hope is that we'll get this solved.
Do you still hold out hope that they're going to be here one day?
President Putin and President Trump seem to have a regard for each other that could work favorably, you know, for these children, and we just feel like eventually the right people will be in place to to help these kids come home. I mean, we definitely hold out hope for it. Yes, if you can.
But one thing the Romanos know for sure is that both boys will always have a home in Jefferson, Georgia. For Full Measure, I'm Lisa Fletcher.